you got to show up and prepare for that fight against your enemy in the best way you can, but you can never lose your moral compass.
On this episode of the Northern Sentinels podcast, I speak with Austin Douglas. A 20-year veteran of the Canadian Army, Austin was one of the few black officers in the military, and he reflects on this as he walks me through his experience growing up in Montreal, life at the Royal Military College, and the challenges of multiple overseas deployments. After leaving the military, he found ways to continue to serve in defense industry, where he's a senior manager with General Dynamics Mission Systems. He's also active in helping the Canadian military with their culture change efforts. I'm thankful Austin agreed to share so many personal experiences, and I learned a lot about a friend during this session. Without further delay, my conversation with Austin Douglas. Hey Austin, thanks for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time on a rainy holiday Monday to come over and record this.
Yeah, no problems. Appreciate you having me over.
I think one of the fascinating things about talking to anybody is always finding out about their family origins. And maybe you can start off by talking a little bit about your family, where your family comes from, and then I guess eventually, where home is for you before you join the service.
Yeah, sure. Born and raised, I guess I'll start with me. Born and raised in Montreal, Quebec, and lived the early part of my childhood there. I was there alone originally because my brother was born before me in Grenada, the West Indies. That's where my parents are from, small island in the Caribbean, pretty far south when you look at it, as far south as Trinidad and Tobago, just on the north end of South America. And they were born and raised there, met, got married. My mother was, I guess, a domestic worker, if you will, would sort of be a good title. And my dad was a mechanic. And when my brother was born, he kind of stayed in Grenada till he was 6 years old, and they emigrated to Montreal and had me, and sort of started along that path. And it was a bit strange, I guess, because a lot of my family moved to New York City and emigrated there. I think a lot of people went to the States, but for whatever reason, a small contingent just went up to Montreal, and that's where we put down our roots. So being there, a bit isolated from family and cousins and aunts and uncles, but that's kind of the start of it for us.
And that, a number of people I've talked to have made the connections with their family origins about there was already somebody from our family who was in that location.
Yeah.
And that's why that was really the main driver is we don't know much about Canada, whether it be Montreal, Toronto, doesn't matter, but we knew somebody there. Was that the reason that the family took Montreal?
I think we're like first generation there. I think at the time it said, where can you get immigration status to, and where can you go settle, and where can you get a job? And I think my dad found a job as a mechanic. Did he know somebody there? Maybe. I never really asked that question, to be honest with you.
And how about New York then? So you said a lot of the families in New York.
Yeah, I think, we talked about this before. On my mother's side, there's 13 brothers and sisters. And then the same thing with my dad's side, 12 brothers and sisters. The majority of them, if not 90% of them, are in the States, in New York. A small number of them in Montreal, Toronto would be the metropolitan areas. But I think my dad just went to Montreal, found a job there, and that was it. But probably a friend, I would say, would make sense. A friend would say, hey, come up, they're hiring here, or they're doing this here, or you can find a job, or have a line on a job for you. And I think that's how that started. Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing more intricate than that I know of.
Have you ever spent any time in Grenada?
I have. It's you go back there, it's a small island. There's not much to do, right? So when I was a kid, I went back there probably every 3-4 years, and going back to my grandmother's house, which seemed like a mansion at the time, right? You're not sort of used to space, and it's hard to compartmentalize what that means, but you're just in a house, you're out playing in the fields and out playing with your cousins and enjoying it for what it is. I think the last time I was there in 2010, it looked tiny.
Okay.
You're sort of now living in Canada. You've been here for such a long time. You have your big house, 2,000 or 3,000 square feet. Your kids have their own spaces and their own rooms, and families not congregated the same way as they were sort of in those Caribbean days. And you go back and like, wow, this place is tiny. Like, how did your mother do this? And how does 10 brothers and sisters live in this one isolated space? But everybody shares a room. Everybody helps with the cooking. You kind of make sense of it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I've been there a number of times, but every time I go back, last time I went with the kids, it's like, what are the kids going to do? You're kind of worried about them. I think in Canada, there's so much programming, so much for them to do, so many activities, not the same though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's, I don't know if maybe as you get older, do you crave that more of that simplicity, or do you look at that and go, you know what, I don't really feel like that's of interest to me?
Yeah, not sure. I think when I look back to COVID, and that'd probably be the first instance of the world slowing down and my son not being able to go to competitive sports and doing hockey 3-4 nights a week. You're like, wow, what do we do with our time? And how do you fill that in the confines of your home, in your backyard? That was a bit of an adjustment. Do I crave that? I think I crave a little bit of quiet now, a little bit of simplicity to life.
Yeah.
As time goes by. And I think you probably get used to it. I kind of make the equation of when you're serving overseas and you kind of let go of all the amenities of home. You just make the mental adjustment, right? You go, you're sort of doing your work in the day, you have supper, then you kind of have movie night with the troops, and then you read a book and you go to bed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so kind of on that theme about, how you spend your time, how did you spend your time as a kid and growing up in Montreal?
Yeah, so I grew up in a place called NDG, Notre Dame de Grace, which is fairly close to downtown. And as you know, no cell phones at the time, and none of those other controls that parents have on us. And my mother was a housekeeper, as I said, during my early childhood. And when I think of the summer now with our kids in summer and pre-programmed activities, whether it's soccer or hockey or March break camps, you name it, pretty much I was just out running the street. If you think of that, I think there's one of these like YouTube skits of the wild things and kids just on their bikes and running the streets. That was exactly it. Get on your bike, go to the local park. Hopefully your buddies were there at the same time.
Yeah.
Or you just throw a ball on the wall and you wait for them to show up. And then if they do and you get enough as a team, it's like, hey, run to so-and-so's house because we need a fifth so we can have 5-on-5. And then you're just at the park playing box ball or baseball or soccer, and you're there till, 1 or 2, go home, have a lunch, come back to the field, and just told your mother you'll be back sometime at dark. And that was my childhood.
Did you have any sort of connection to service, not necessarily military service in the family, or anything in your youth that would maybe have planted an early seed about joining the Army?
I guess the earliest seed would have been in going to church. We went to a church called St. Matthew's, and I think in all those church spaces they have these floor halls. And, in most of them, in St. Matthew's Church and different churches, we went through Trinity Church, they had the Cubs that were there, the Cubs and the Scouts, on like a Tuesday night or a Friday night. And, the leader's part of the congregation. It's like, hey, officers should come to Cubs and have something to do on Tuesday nights and be busy. And that was probably the first start of putting on a uniform and putting whatever that thing around your neck is, the scarf, and collaring it up and being part of a small team and having your teepee tent and getting engaged in that way. That was probably the first instance of, I don't want to call it paramilitary, whatever they call those small young kids groups, but Cub Scouts and Ventures, I did all that.
So you're spent a lot of time sort of outside as a kid, a lot of autonomy. Did that continue from, when you were really young, like through into teenage years? Did you, you connected with the Scout program? I mean, what did the sort of the lead up to military service look like then? Yeah,
a lot of autonomy. My parents divorced as early as I could remember, so I never lived with my dad, just lived with my mother, my brother, and I. My mother was a housekeeper, had long hours, sort of out to work early in the morning, back, not late at night, but 4 or 5 p.m., just normal working hours, and we just kind of figured it out ourselves. So from Cubs to Scouts to Air Cadets, joined all those, researched those, found them by myself. So I did Air Cadets, and then, as you know, and the small secret, did a small bit of time, probably 3 months or so as a sapper at the reserve unit, which was once again adjacent to my high school, Westmount High. I think it was 2-3 Field Squadron right on St. Catherine there. So I did that for a small period of time, and I guess it was just all part of being part of the group, liking the outdoors, liking the adventure, liking the change of scenery, doing the summer camps. So totally, independent with choosing that path up until the point of joining RMC and joining the military in that way.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, a sapper is a term for for a field engineer or a combat engineer in the military.
And I don't know if I was really a sapper though, because I think I only had the cornflake. So
Okay.
I'm just going to say that, I joined the unit, got the kit, and was starting on that journey. And I think, so high school goes up to grade 11. And then I think I must have did in my second year of CEGEP, probably going to use it to pay for university because I got accepted to Concordia, McGill, and then RMC. And then once I got accepted to RMC, then had a quick retirement from the sapper regiment and
right.
started my years.
It's okay.
In the Reg Force.
We'll definitely claim you as a sapper.
That's where it all started, right? Yep. The magic, the fertilizer.
Well, yeah, you do wonder, right? I mean, it isn't so much, I think, about especially at that stage. It's not so much about am I infantry or what my core branch is, but you just get a bit of a taste for what that might look like. The culture, the service, and was that something that you were naturally drawn to because you haven't got service in your family? Where you just sort of feel like you were naturally drawn to it, and what was that transition like from being a civilian into the military?
I think naturally drawn, and pop culture, if you will, whatever movies were at the time, Full Metal Jacket, Platoon, Taps or Stripes, comedies. I think that's always appealed to me, and it just resonated, being part of a team, belonging. And I do remember when I think I went to Long Point when I was in the reserves and got the uniform and came home and laid it all out. And, when you reflect back, it's probably the first time you think of belonging to something bigger, putting on a uniform, joining a group. Those always seem to resonate for one reason or another. But I look back on my life now and, having a quick chat with a friend the other day of where I am now, especially with retirement and where I've gotten to, and I could never have pictured how I got there. And if you look at this and say this is success, it's like, wow, kind of figured it out. But it was more organic than anything else. My mother wasn't overly helpful in guiding any of those decisions or providing advice. And I went to the unit as a sapper and joined, right? And when you look back now and you think, okay, here's a guy who went to CEGEP, going to university, should join as an officer. Kind of random how it all kind of fixed itself, right? Had I probably went to McGill, I probably would have just been an NCM and stayed in the unit and didn't really understand the tie between university and officer and, the way it was promoted back then. But pretty organic in sort of how I got to navigate that path and had the alignment or affiliation of wanting to be part of a uniform group and kind of stuck with me.
What did the initial impressions of your mom, your siblings, your community about joining the military?
Yeah, my mom was very religious, growing up through elementary school and high school. I went to church, I think, every Sunday till I graduated high school. I remember getting certificates for, perfect attendance. And my mother's message would be like, this is in God's hands. So, I think I was fairly... smart's probably not the right word, but aware or make good conscious decisions, and they weren't negative, joining Scouts or joining Cubs, joining Air Cadets were all good organizations to be a part of. So that was, I think, gave her a bit of ease. And I think when I went to RMC and said I was going away to school, I think she was proud of the fact of, going to university and sort of first of that generation of our family, the first cousins that really were from parents that immigrated from the Caribbean and joining an organization or being part of an organization, structured organization, and then going to a university in Canada was a good thing. I think probably more on the friend side was a bit of the surprise of leaving Montreal and having the opportunity to go to a McGill or Concordia and be part of that group and that demographic and still having a bunch of fun with a very multicultural group and then going to RMC, which is seen as a very not a diverse group, if you will. A white army is essentially what I was joining, right? And everything that they understood from TV. And I guess at that time would be, Canadian Forces doing peacekeeping. And they just wondered where I fit in that institution. While they always knew I did Cubs and Scouts, I think that was a step change, right? Of now I'm leaving and going somewhere else. And that took a bit of, I wouldn't say adjusting to, but communication with friends, trying to understand that decision-making to go there.
Yeah, I mean, Cubs and Scouts are community organizations. They might have a national structure, But they're community based.
Yeah, they're around the corner from your house, right?
Yeah.
And if you're in a community, they kind of serve that community, and they get kids from that area to join. So you're still within your group of friends that are down the block or 2 streets away. But when you sort of get on a plane or get on a bus and go to a national institution, that's different.
Right. So where you arrive at RMC, I mean, you basic training, arrive at RMC, and so what is that like now? It's not just university.
Yeah.
It's your step into adulthood, right? It is where you work, being your studies. It's where you socialize. It's a bit of sort of a place to come of age. What was that like?
I would say, when you leave Chilliwack and if I have it right, you take a plane to Trenton, and then you get on this 2-hour bus ride all in the middle of night, and it's a bit of theater, right?
Yeah.
You get up on the parade square, and there's these people in these white pith helmets, and everybody's screaming at you, and you make your way to this dormitory, and you have no idea where you are. And then finally you wake up. I think I signed up for all that theater. So that was good. That was fun. That was kind of everything you expected it to be. As you start going through it, I wouldn't say it was overly conscious, but you then start getting access to, once you start allowed to talk to people at the meal hall, people from different parts of the country, Nova Scotia, Manitoba, out west, coming together and figuring out every story of why they're here. As I quickly realized, there's not a lot of people from urban centers at the time, from Montreal or Toronto or BC at military college. I'd probably say to myself, Austin's independent analysis, I think there's probably a lot more opportunity there, or you see a lot more opportunity to do a lot in those metropolitan cities as you do smaller communities. So, that's probably the first noticeable difference I would say that I got from RMC. And then the other big obvious one, being a person of color, a Black Canadian, in my year of 95, I was the, one Black student in the school. And then when you look to the larger demographic, there was one other Black student in the school, Michelle Robertson, who was a year ahead of me in 5 Squadron. So there was 2 Black students in a school of, I wouldn't know what the numbers are at the time, the class 700-800, maybe a bit less at the time.
At the college?
Yeah, at the college.
Yeah, that's probably right before the other colleges closed.
Yeah, right before
that's probably probably close.
So I think if there's an adjustment there, that was it, and that was very visual, and that was very conscious. And but I would say, in getting through those early years at RMC, much like anybody else, you just want to fit into the crowd and be part of the organization and not have that be something that gets attention, positive or negative. You just kind of want to blend in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Upon reflection, do you think the institution had any sort of understanding of the unique situation that you and Michelle were in as 2 Black Canadians in a student population of 800?
Yeah, there's, I'll try to parse it, because there's what I knew then and what I know now.
Yeah.
Right, which are 2 different things, and how I would show up then and how I would show up now, and advice I would give people that are there now. There was no accommodation, is probably the wrong word, but there's no discussion at all with respect to, maybe day 2 or day 3 or week 1, a padre or director of cadets or anybody that's sort of in what we would say now would be a cultural officer or paying attention to diversity. Say, Austin, welcome to RMC. You might notice that you're the only person of color in your class. There's only 2 people of color in the school. If you need support or help dealing with those, help dealing with that.
The reality.
Yeah, the reality of it. There's a padre here to talk to. There's this person here to talk to, or you can go speak to anybody. That was never brought up in any at all, right? It was just, you were there and you figured it out for yourself. And to this day, as Michelle Robertson's one of my best friends, and obviously I gravitate for obvious reasons. I think what Michelle and I got out of it at the time, and what RMC was trying to do at the time was, increase diversity. And I think obviously they were great to have us there. So that was probably my first introduction with being part of, social media and posters and helping recruiting, not very representative of the school, but Michelle and I would be in a poster with another Asian girl and 2 white students, and welcome to RMC. But looked very diverse on a poster of 5 cadets, but it was not accurate. We did not represent 20 to 25% of the student body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We talked previously about this, and I was completely sort of ignorant to, the impacts that the outside world would maybe have on you. And we'd spoken about Somalia and about the murder of Shadana Roan in Somalia and the impact that had on you. Because what year were you in?
3rd year. And I think that's when the schools all merged in. I think CMR closed and we got a bunch of their imports in. And then you sort of get your annual imports of RMC coming in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did that affect you? How did that affect your relationship with, family back home and friends?
Yeah, it's always a bit tough to talk about. I would say this, in year 1 and 2 of RMC, you're definitely an underclassman. You're navigating your way through, right? By year 3, I guess it would be a junior, right before year 4 and be a senior. And I was fortunate to have some leadership positions as a rook adjutant 3rd year and a section commander in the 2nd semester of 3rd year. So I would say more aware of who I was as a cadet, the ability to articulate a bit more and just conscious of how I would participate in the social discussion at school. So then, yeah, clearly there was, when the Airborne Regiment was in Somalia, they killed the young teenager, Shadana Roan, and that was the first time that race had come up in a very conscious way at RMC. And when we look at demographics and cultures and subcultures, there's male and female at RMC for sure, right? And then I was a subculture of one, a black cadet at RMC. And, a lot of discussion at the time was, there was controversy about the Airborne Regiment. What they did was, I don't think anybody thought it was right, but I think people thought they were doing a job, and maybe that, detainee got what he deserved, or this is just part of being on a deployed mission, and these things happen. And I think that was the first conscious reflection of me of how can the Canadian Forces deploy somewhere to help on a peacekeeping operation and kill someone, a non-combatant, right? And that was the first time I thought about whether RMC was the place for me, whether I wanted to stay there, whether I could survive in this culture, because debates in class were people that were condoning it, and I wouldn't say condoning it, but, apologetic for it, or trying to explain their way of how this could take place, or the behavior of the Airborne Regiment and other things that were happening at the time with slashing tires on the parade square and,
right.
The whole circumstances that went around it. So when the Airborne Regiment got disbanded, I did not lose an ounce of sleep, right? It was but for me, there was no sympathy, right? But there was a lot of sympathy from others. And I think being there and going back home and having friends of color, them trying to reconcile how I could be part of an organization that did this and killed innocent people, especially people of color, and make sense of that. So that probably be my first reflection of race and culture in the CAF, and struggling with my place in it, and seeing if I belonged long term there. And I guess I would say went so far as, with family and friends back home, thinking of leaving the organization at the time and just doing something else. But I was encouraged to stay, and, told I was there for a different reason, and, the path was mine to navigate, and all good things that peers and adults and friends would tell you. So I stayed. Yeah.
So you were really independent as a youth. Did you have any mentors when you were at RMC, or in your sort of early days?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think that was a thing back then. I just navigated that by myself with a good group of friends, friends that you have up until today, but there's no mentors there that spoke to me in any way that helped me understand things in a more complex way. No officer came up to me and talked to me about, the events of the time and the impact that they were having. And I didn't bring it up as well, right? I shared with you a letter I sent to the CDS last year talking about events like that. I didn't know how to look for that, didn't know how to ask for that. And I think at the time people would probably say it was gaslighting to an extent if you brought up race, to be like, what are you talking about? there's no issue. Look, you're here, you're at RMC, you're doing well. Like, why are you making an issue out of this? So I don't think I was armed for it. I don't think the organization was prepared to have that discussion. So yeah, I think, up until 2020, as odd as it may seem, I think I navigated much of my journey in the CAF internally as it pertained to leadership opportunities, progression, growth, and definitely in, I would say, my first deployment to Bosnia, understanding culture other than our own differently and being empathetic towards that.
And okay, so you finish RMC, you end up in your first unit, and you have a deployment to Bosnia. So I mean, what is that maybe first exposure as a commissioned officer now, whether it be in the regular army or on an overseas operation? How is that?
Yeah, I think that's where you start getting to shaping who you are as an individual. I think if there's anything that the Canadian Forces affords us, it is the ability to see the world, and not sort of the 5-star resorts, but the corners of the world that need our help. So while I was OC Recce, thanks to the good old Dragoons, they took on the Recce task in Bosnia. So I went over there as an Ayotte Banja Luka at MND Southwest. So MND Multinational Division headquarters. Yeah, which was. So
what does an LNO do?
So, we're part of, I think we're part of a
liaison officer.
Liaison officer as part of a British contingent. And we had company groups in different parts of the country, Corlici, Javar, all these names that are coming back to me. So my job was just to, understand what we're doing, these far off quadrants of Bosnia, sort of understand those daily reportings, and just made sure we coordinated them back to the British headquarters. What it also did afford me was the opportunity, carte blanche, with my driver, to just travel the country, right? Visit the Polish battle group, the Canadian battle group, the British battle group, and just see all parts of it. Once again, pretty autonomous, right? Just me and my driver with the radio, going to Tuzla, visiting the U.S. counterparts in MND North. I think they were all over the place. And I think there you have, visually you see the way, especially in a war-torn country, the way people are and how they're just trying to survive. And I think there's an empathy to that, to know that you're there to help, but you go back to this first world country called Canada with everything you need, running water and schools and infrastructure. So I think for me, it was pretty, the visual impact for me was pretty big, in sort of having that appreciation for the way others live and having that sense of empathy that, for the grace of where we're born, our life path is a little bit written. And I'd say the biggest impact is when they did the Kosovo bombings. And that would be in 93, I think.
99.
99. Yeah, 99. Yeah, because I probably got there in, I think April 99, right? Somewhere around there.
I was in Macedonia when that started.
So when you see the migration of people, on a road with their life on their backs, that is pretty humbling, and you're in a Jeep with water and rations, and you just want to give all of it away, right? To do whatever you can. I think that was the first instance of a real humility of, wow, we're trying to do as much as we can, and I'm glad Canadians are there helping. I think we're sort of known for that, but that would sort of be the first impact on me of being deployed overseas and seeing the world for all it is, right? This
is the reason you joined the Army. Probably not the human side of it, but the actual adventure side. Did you sort of get that ability to scratch that itch a little bit on this deployment?
On the tour, I think so. I had good flexibility. I ended up being great friends with the aide-de-camp to the general. So it was the ability to get on the chopper and, as he visited theater and do all those cool stuff. And they had the British SAS there and sort of see what those guys do. And at the time we were going after, the acronym is PIFWICS. I'm not even sure what that stands for. People of Interest.
People indicted for war crimes, I think.
Okay, yeah. So,
for the trials in The Hague. Yeah.
Exactly. So understanding that, I think that sense of adventure, would have wanted to go through as OC Recce? 100%. Didn't get that opportunity. Would have great other leadership opportunities on future tours after, but I think that itch got scratched. I definitely enjoyed, navigating and being out on the front edge and seeing different parts of the world and seeing different militaries. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Okay, so you get back from your first overseas deployment, and what do you return to? What's the next thing, the next step in the Army for you?
What happened to me? I think at the time I came back and I had applied to Concordia to go to start doing my master's of public policy and administration. And I wanted to go back to the RMR regiment, which was once again on St. Catherine Street.
Right.
Just down from my high school. Once again, all the familiar things. And I ended up getting posted to Saint Jean to do the leadership school and train officers there, and spent 3 or 4 years of my life there. I don't know to say in hindsight. I think all good postings and all good leadership opportunities that the CAF gives to you as young junior officers are good. So that was the next assignment for me after my first tour. Enjoyed that, sort of framing young minds and helping them pass. I remember when I went through phase training. It's infantry phase training, and that's always a struggle, right? Phase 2, phase 3, and what I'd say we had these old school sergeants and warrant officers whose job at the time I think was to make life as painful and as difficult on young officers as I could make it in a good way. I think it was there to test your mettle, right? And, it was horrible, those phases, right? It was just day one, it's kind of raining and you're trying to not get wet, and then you have a platoon warrant that just makes you do a leopard crawl through a mud rut and get dirty on day one so you're not worried about it.
Right.
Oh my God. I think we slowly started to turn the corner of, my mindset was everybody that's on basic training should have the ability to pass, and let's see how many we can get through the system as opposed to how many we can fail, right? So not that was some nouveau thought, but that's the way I kind of approached it. And you still had the same numbers, I think, that fail in the end, right? Whatever the numbers end up being, just not the right thing for some people, or it is. But, there's a story I'll tell in the back end of this when we get to some other stuff. And, what I would say is when you're training young officers, as you would know, being a D cadets at RMC, you are having a lasting impact of things that you can't see now, but that will come back to you years later. So enjoyed that. I think I did a pretty good job there. And yeah, spent 3 or 4 years there before I went back to regimental duty.
Did it come naturally to you? I mean, we've talked about your independence, and whether it be as a young man in Montreal, given this role in Bosnia where you have a ton of independence. Did that ability or that sort of inherent independence make it easier, make it tougher to connect as a mentor or a coach at basic training for young Canadians joining?
I would say yes. In hindsight now, the stories that of people that I've crossed paths with would say yes. I didn't know it at the time. I was always just being me, which is a fairly relaxed and easygoing guy, and showing up as who I am. I never put on a character, I never put on a game face, never put on an instructor face. I just showed up as me, was interactive with the young officers, and hard and serious when I needed to be. Like I said, here's the course, here's a curriculum. Some of it's easy, some of it's difficult, some of it's very difficult, some of it's a mental challenge, just presented as it was. And I think that's always stuck with me. I've always had this general fairness towards others. And being a person of color, I don't want to say this, not that other people treat other people unfairly. I would just say I was always responsive to just see people for who they were. But at the same time, probably putting through a couple thousand students through basic officer training, I could probably count on one hand the number of Black officers that went through. And I can only remember 2. So saying the one hand is kind of being generous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you finish up your time as an instructor at basic officer training. And then, I guess we get into sort of more of the Afghanistan years now, right? So what is that? What's this for sort of the first brush with Afghanistan for you?
Yeah. So I think So when I was in St. Jean, 9/11 happens, of course. And, remember looking at the TV saying, wow, I guess I'll be in Afghanistan one day, not knowing what that means, right? So I go back to 3RCR with Colonel Don Denny as the CO, who, is a ranger, and turned the light battalion into a ranger battalion, so you would say,
right.
And probably back in the mold of everything that you want to do, right? As a company 2IC, I think I did rifle company, combat support company, and then I was an admin company when we ended up going overseas to Afghanistan, what would be Camp Julian at the time, just down from King's Palace or Queen's Palace.
Okay.
Can't remember the exact location.
And what does that look like? What did Camp Julian look like compared to where you were like living in Bosnia, as an example?
Yeah, I think, the early days of, forgive me if I get the names wrong, Colonel Ian Hope and the Princess Patricia's going over and doing those initial deployments of war fighting. We got into that first structured compound, the very big footprint and project out of there. And I think Canada was trying to find its way how to best participate in the Afghanistan war, and whether we're going to be in these small pockets or whether we're going to stage from a big camp. And nobody knew what it needed to be at the time. And I remember at the time when we deployed as a light battalion, there was a big controversy of, whether it should be 3RCR that goes or 1RCR that goes because they have all the vehicles and et cetera, et cetera. So ended up going there. And, the most significant thing that happened, because we've been on a number of peacekeeping operations as an army before. And while there were events in the, I think Medak Pocket and the Patricias and stuff in Bosnia, they definitely weren't reported on. And these are stories that I didn't hear about or know about. But, early in the Afghanistan tour, Jay Faco, friend of mine, and Sergeant Short and Corporal Barenfinger,
right.
I think his name was,
yep.
Had casualties in the Altis vehicle that was struck by an IED. And that was the first instance of understanding that, wow, friends and people that you see every day can go out on a mission and maybe not come back. And that brought a serious tone to the mission of what we're there and what we're doing, and that we're fighting for the first time in my service an enemy that was persistent and was going to fight back in unconventional ways.
Like how did the leadership at the time deal with that, or was there any sort of effort to explain the significance of this, or did people just sort of look at it and go, well, I guess this is a situation we're in now, and we just gotta keep moving forward?
Yeah, it was, once again, it's Austin Douglas then versus Austin Douglas, the company commander, and the Canadian Forces X years removed from those early casualties. It was a big event, right? Probably good to say things slowed down or stopped. We paid a lot of attention to making sure casualties were treated properly and trying to figure out how you inform next of kin, try to figure out how you repatriate them, try to figure out how you continue on with missions. I remember at that time, then they brought all the vehicles from 1RCR over to Theta, and we started training on those to provide ourselves more protection and being very reflexive to what was taking place, because we were learning, when you fast forward to probably a couple of years later, and Austin Douglas, the company commander, and having casualties, and not to be, I don't think we're being callous about it, but we understood that casualties are part of the framework of war fighting,
right.
Which was a change of posture of sending the casualties home very respectfully and doing everything that we would normally do and repatriating them honorably. But like we were back on the mission seconds later, if you will, after a CASEVAC, because that's the theater of warfare we're in. But at the time for the initial, Camp Julian and the initial casualties, I think we're figuring out that process, right? I ended up being on the Giles Valley Board of Inquiry, going through the process of the very deliberate, did everybody die green? Why were they there? Were all those formalities in place? All those things got automated, if you will, at some point, or very streamlined as we learned and matured and understood how we have to do that and repatriate casualties back honorably, but get on with the mission. But so I think everybody was learning that process and sort of leading on your friends and your peer group of, dealing with a friend that got injured or dealing with NCMs that got killed in war and moving forward in a good way. I think you realize that you got to move forward and you got to be good because you're there to do the job. And I think internally it's about trying to find that level of comfort and understand, did you grieve enough, or is now the time to grieve, or do you grieve later?
Right. Yeah. It's not. I guess it's probably not so much about diminishing the incident at all. You just become the muscle memory about the things that need to happen. It just gets deepened, and you can still be respectful about dealing with those casualties, but you probably move on a little more quickly because the system is able to handle it more quickly than it was initially.
And that's probably a good way to describe it. What I'd say is the system does what it's designed to do and takes that. I don't want to say burden, but I will say a bit of the burden off the leadership. As an OC in theater years later, if the OC is left with all that administration and all that mental trauma and administrative trauma, it is a bit debilitating. You sort of need to press on with the troops that are still there and still looking to get home safely and still need your leadership, and that's where your focus needs to be.
Now, you were Company 2IC in Kabul?
Company 2IC in Kabul.
Okay, so now you go down, a number of years later, you go down to Kandahar, which is a very different environment, as a company commander. And what were your initial impressions, having already had Afghan time in Kabul? What were your initial impressions as a commander in Kandahar?
Yeah, I could go on. We can go on forever talking about that tour. I would say I'll back up a little bit. We're in Fort Irwin doing some training with, the group that went out before, and they're putting you through these exercises of these days that you think you're never going to have in Afghanistan. And as troops, some had been there before, and some have, and you're like, this would never happen, But I will credit our training system to say, everything that they did out there, well, it didn't happen verbatim. The same sequence of events were there. I remember in training, we had this crazy day of casualties and war fighting and you name it. I'm like, IEDs. Yeah. And it's like 3, 4, 5 IEDs. I'm like, this would never happen on an ordinary day. But lo and behold, I had a day where we're doing a route clearance in Afghanistan where engaging the enemy, 6 IEDs, QRFs compromised, like no assets left, right? So just to kind of put that in context. So all I have to say is when I went to back as a company commander in with Connor Majkowski Task Force 110, we were war fighting, from day one. And I also tell the story when we did the TAC recce, I think in early December, and I went out on 3 patrols with the different platoons. Two of the lieutenant platoon commanders took me out, and one of the sergeants took me out. I think the officer was away on leave. So I'd come back. It was mid-Christmas, just watching the news, and then one week, one of the patrol commanders that took me out, I think Lieutenant Null might have been the name at the time, dies in an IED. I'm like, wow, that's kind of, eye-opening. And then, a week later, the sergeant that took me out on a patrol dies in an IED. So I'm at home, it's like, where am I going? How did I get here? Why am I still in? This doesn't make sense. Anyways, you quickly put that behind you. I get to Afghanistan. I'm in CAF, ready to deploy out, stage the day before, and another casualty happens in Nakone, this village I was going to, where I was going to serve. And it was Wayne Niven was the OC at the time, and they had I would be guessing at the number, but around 5 KIAs, if you will, at least, and a number of other injuries. So
in his company?
In his company.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So the day before I'm supposed to go, like I said, there was another KIA, and that was the first brush of anxiety I've ever had in my 20-year career. I was like, where am I going? How did I get stuck in this position? This is crazy, So that lasted about an hour, went to bed, and then you're just in the machine, right? You're just like, drop your barrack box here, get your rifle, get on the chopper, and you go out. And I think, so I was the 3rd company to rip in. So the battle group had been there, doing their business. Charles Company had been there with.
So you're the 3rd company of the new group to arrive and start to operate in.
Correct.
In Kandahar.
I was the last one in.
Got it.
The last 3rd to come in. So they were fighting, they had some casualties of wounded in action, no KIAs yet, I don't believe. But the first KIA we had, as a Canadian contingent was back up in Kabul. Colonel Jeff Parker,
Right.
I think, right?
Yeah. Jeff was on a recce, was he not?
On a recce, yeah. And I'm thinking, people are dying like up in Kabul still, which was considered very safe at the time, right, compared to Kandahar. So I think for 6-7 months, you're just in that mindset that you're on a war footing and you're there to fight. And for Bravo Company, that was our experience. You know, we had a compound in Soja, which was where the company headquarters were. It was a very big compound. The guns ended up showing up there. Had an engineering regiment assigned to us. You know, a good chunk of them were there, and parts of the NSC were there. There was a big staging point. It had three platoon positions in different villages, and you know, essentially they were fighting every day. And as you know, our company took a lot of wounded in action and a lot of KIAs as well. And we had a pretty close relationship with our engineers, as I think all infantry companies do. We lost a number of engineers in IEDs, 2 sergeants, in fact. Yeah. So pretty poignant, you know. Tough to speak about, and I think as we engage in this is something that we're not used to speaking about, or not me, kind of just take that experience and bottle it away. And when you do revisit it, and I think there's good stories to tell there. It is a process to go through, because when I came back from tour, I never dealt with it. You kind of just talk to your peers and have some drinks at the mess and get on with life. And maybe we'll talk about this later, but I'm not sure if we kind of prepare our officers or help them kind of disengage from the experiences they have. I think as leaders, we put a lot on their shoulders and expect them to get through it. But yeah, it is a big impact for sure. And I remember when getting my MSM, you know, as I told you and others, it's like would give back all those medals for sure to have, you know, everybody come back, right? So it's kind of, you wear that stuff with a heavy heart because it says a lot of good things about Austin Douglas and what he did over there. But, you know, in the moment, you know, you're good Canadians sacrificing their lives, and they would do it. They do it again, 100%. That I know, but you still got to sort of live that experience. But so very poignant, war fighting every day, a lot of wounded in action, a lot of KIAs. Yeah, still trying to process and sort of move through that even as we speak.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, how can it not be a incredibly formative experience in somebody's life? And you're overseas in this combat zone for 6-7+ months, and you come back home, right? So what do you end up doing when you come back home? You're still in the Army. You've had an experience that most, not even just most Canadians, most humans will never have. So what do you end up doing when you come home now?
Yeah, I guess I'll back up one, because I do want to tell a story and close a loop, and then I'll talk about coming back home, because it's I retired quickly after coming back, right? Within months. But I know when we're talking about culture, and I'm not sure if it's good to talk about now or if we want to talk about it later.
No, absolutely.
But, I do. We remember talking about the struggles in '93 of the Somali that was killed, the teenager by the airborne regiment. And I do remember, as a point of leadership over there in dealing with insurgents and detainees that we caught, and having the ability as an officer to influence that. One thing that was very conscious for me was how we were going to treat detainees, right? Because I think even in our verbiage, when we're taking KIAs and wounded in action, the troops get impacted by that for sure, right? And they want to fight back. They want to fight back, right? As anybody would, and so would I. And as you try to navigate the rules of engagement and engage in, armed or unarmed combatants, which you're allowed to do, it's precious in trying to navigate that. But whenever we caught detainees, they would be brought back to Camp Soja, where I was, and sort of brought through that process before they'd be brought back to CAF. And the point of emphasis I made, and always being aware of, being deployed in operations, catching them, is like, detainees will be respected. They will be treated in accordance with, the Geneva laws of armed conflict, and make sure that, they're fed and they're given water and they're treated humanely, et cetera, et cetera. And I made a point to visit, them and see, how they were, and made sure to visit them as they left and make sure they were treated the same way. And the only point I make about that, especially when we talk sort of 2020 and beyond with sort of living in COVID and CAF dealing with culture, it's the ability now as a leader, so much more aware of myself, so much, more assertive in the ability to influence and have impact, right? To provide the CAF, with culture and diversity and help prevent strategic failure in that instance. Would that have happened without me there? No, we've learned a lot as a force by then, right? And as a culture, and sort of learn how to treat detainees. And there aren't many black officers in the RCR or in the infantry as far as I can remember. So I'm not saying what I did was above and beyond what anybody else would have done. All I'm just trying to articulate is I was very conscious in the moment that everyone's going to be treated respectively and everyone's going to be treated humanely. Because even in, when we anticipated having a curfew or because, IEDs at night, troops would still be, these people need to learn this and these people need to learn that. But it's like, these are Afghans and they have a name and we're here to help. And as impactful and stressful as it is here on us with taking casualties and KIAs, like that is the core tenet that cannot escape you, right? Otherwise you lose the morality that you have of why you're there, right? And in the end, you're there to help, right? You're there to help Afghans. And are we fighting an enemy? 100%. But as Canadians and as a Western society, we're there to do that in a certain way. And sure, they're using IEDs and they're using, other methods of engaging us in warfare, but that's what they have, right? Sure, if we armed them with C-7s and aircraft and artillery, they would fight that way. So you got to show up and prepare for that fight against your enemy in the best way you can, but you can never lose your moral compass. So all this, I just want to touch on that. And, I think that will sort of frame when I think about culture in the CAF moving forward, sort of early in retirement and sort of post-retirement in COVID and CAF struggle with culture and identity. But coming back, all the things that I signed up for, it's like Recon Platoon Commander, Company 2IC, Company Commander, great job. So now I'm going to go to Toronto and have a chance to be a CO. But Austin Douglas is exhausted. It's like, you sort of
exhausted probably on all levels, physically, emotionally,
mentally. Yeah. And like I think as we sort of understood from a CAF, there's no release valve there to let the pressure out, right? It's like you're doing great work and there's more of that to come. And like get him another, type A job so he gets the right PER. So Eric Pelicano was the career manager at the time. It's like, Eric, I'm going to do staff school, but I'm not moving. I'm going home and I'll do it through distance learning, right? I don't know if they're considered, priority A or priority B now, how that's viewed. But at that point, it just didn't matter. I was exhausted, was not prepared for another move, and just needed a bit of stability. I had 2 kids. My daughter was, I went home early from training in Fort Irwin, had my daughter, and then deployed, right? And in all those ramp-up years, my son was 5, and just needed to let the pressure valve out. So serendipitously, a company called Thales reached out to me. Friend through a friend said, "Hey, we're looking for some project managers. It was almost 20 years to the day. Like, what do you think about retiring?" Hadn't entered my mind. I hadn't thought about that. I had gone back to school and did some post-grad. I'd gotten my MBA. So maybe subconsciously I was always learning and trying to think about what the next step would be. But the ability to collect a very small pension and get paid what I was getting paid as a major made the pretty independent leap without much consultation of even family or friends. It was pretty internal of, this is what's good for Austin and this is what I'm going to do next. And put in a letter of resignation and got that ball rolling.
What was the reaction of the forces? I mean, we're going through I'm still saying we, right? I've been over a year. I'm still saying we. The forces is going through a pretty significant challenge with recruiting and retaining people. And what was your experience in that leaving in terms of, was there an effort to retain you? How was that managed by leadership, or was it managed by leadership?
Yeah, it wasn't managed by leadership, and that's not a knock. I think once again, it's who we were as a force at the time. Hindsight 20, not hindsight, but I think in Austin Douglas, in sort of what we know about culture now, getting out post Afghanistan, somebody would have reached down and wanted to have a conversation. It's like, Austin, you're doing well, you're progressing, you got great operational experience at all levels. Every time you went to regimental duty, you deployed, you're going to staff school. Not that there's promises of great things ahead, but you were one of one, you move the needle when it comes to diversity. So, obviously the choice is yours, but we'd love for you to stay in. We think there's great things ahead for you. You're a representative of the CAF, and, I think that would be something that was worthwhile listening to, whether I got out or not. All that to say, when I sent that letter, I think it was just appreciated by everyone. It's like, okay, got it. The letter was pretty, not overly definitive, and it wasn't I was getting out for any negative reasons. My terms of service are up, and I'm going to retire and move to the private sector. So it was Jim Sims was cost strat at the time. I think he was the regimental.
Yeah, okay.
Regimental, I wouldn't say colonel, but the senior serving, I guess. Not senior serving, but
no. They typically have like a 1-star in the Army that has that's responsible for the different branches and regiments.
Correct. Yeah. So he's the one that got it in process, and then Peter Devlin got it too, and they were very, matter of fact about it, but not at one time did they sort of pull me in for an office call to let's discuss and are you sure? I think they just respected the decision and allowed me to push forward. My pair group is, it's kind of funny because I think as majors, we're all kind of competing and we want to know what's next, and we're all a little bit good, but a little bit grumpy.
Yeah.
Understanding where the next carrot is, and, the Caleb Warris and the Bob Ritchies, and they're like, you get the emails like, wow, like, good for you. You're not chasing the carrot, right? Not that anybody's doing that consciously, but you understand it's part of a process of getting those jobs and doing the next thing and getting promoted. So the ability to let go and for all instances be in charge of your own life and not have a career manager, I think is something we all kind of want a little bit, but we understand while you're in, you don't have that, right? It is mission first and self and family a close second. So, I think they saw a guy like me that did all the courses with them, Recce and 2IC and OC, and they're like, wow, it's like he's going to Toronto. How could you let go of the ladder, right? Or the golden handcuffs? So I think in my peer group, they're all a bit reflective of, am I doing this for the right reasons? Am I staying in? And they all are, and they're awesome guys, and they're rock stars, and they are where I think they should be. So that's all good. I'd say the most poignant part of me leaving on a good note is when I went back to get my MSM and at an Army ball. I saw General Latinchuk there, and he saw me in civilians, and there was others, my counterparts on artillery that was there in uniform still, and he quickly realized that I was no longer in the CAF, right? And his only words were, "I'm so disappointed," in a good way, right? But then quickly conscious and pivots. It's like, thank you for your service. Amazing officer. Glad you're with us. I hope you've had a lasting impact. Almost selling the forces back on me to, hopefully you're taking things that you need and left the things behind that you don't need, and we're going to have a strong, prosperous career in whatever you're doing. And hopefully, if there's a story you need to tell about the CAF, it's positive. So hearing that, it's not because the other part of it can be, here's a guy we invested time in, here's a guy we sent on this, and we gave him one of these coveted positions of commanding and gave him a position in Toronto, and now he's leaving. Like, what a waste, and be very negative. And that could have a bad taste in my mouth, right? So guys like General Latinchuk, General Hillier, that sort of engaged me in a very positive way, left a great impact. And my time in service was good, 95% of it. When I reflect back now, and there's things that, would I have wanted them to go a bit differently? Would I have wanted to change? For sure, but I wasn't armed to have that discussion, didn't know how to have it. Were there things I wish I'd done differently? yes. But when we looked to a bit of the future, didn't know how to do that at that time. But, I think my time in service was good, was well respected by senior officers, and it kind of helped in my transition. Even to this day, I think I saw General Latinchuk maybe 2 years ago. I was coming out of, I think it was the Vimy dinner. So it probably was last year, and I was leaving out of the parking lot. And I saw him with his wife. And as you know, we see many general officers, and it's like, I don't like that guy. I'm not going to move 2 feet out of my way to go say hi. Right? And I'm sure people maybe say that about me. And then there's General Latinchuk. I'm going to cross a river and jump over a bridge and take the effort to go say hi. So I said, hey, I haven't seen you in so long. Just want to say hi. And, once again, as he is enduring to his wife, he's like, can't remember his wife's name, but
Leslie.
This is Austin Douglas, one of our great RCR officers, a veteran of the Afghanistan war, did great things. He's retired and he's in industry. And he's once again blowing up my story in a great way. And, I think for me, those are the engagements that make me feel good about my time in service, good about retiring, good about even to this day trying to re-engage back with the CAF and give back in a meaningful way. Because the CAF is struggling in a number of areas. And I guess I could show up in one or two ways. Pile on, and there's stuff to pile on to, right, for sure. Or, make sure the CAF is acutely aware of where they could probably use some help and use some change, and help be an instrument of that change as well.
And I think you've been an active member in trying to help the CAF figure out this road. Yeah.
I think, so Eleanor Taylor, brought her name up a couple of times. She was an OC with me in Afghanistan. Great friend, right? And I think as the CAF struggled with culture and, the Me Too movement and everything that's being brought to light with respect to sexual harassment that has taken place in the past, I think we know Eleanor's recent story of having a bit of internal conflict and resigning from the CAF, a very courageous step that I think she's trying to figure out to this day, because there is no right or wrong way to go about this. A number of conversations with her about that journey.
And for those who don't know Eleanor Taylor, I'll put some links in the show notes that can help you learn a little bit about the story Austin's talking about right now.
Yeah. So as Eleanor and I exchange stories, I would talk to Eleanor about, being an individual and, race. And as we went through, I would say Black Lives Matter during COVID and, struggling with identity. And, there was a story that I always had in the background that I never spoke to, right? And that's just a bit of my internal struggle and all that to say, not all of it. And the majority of it isn't negative, but there's been a story there for my time in service in the CAF. And it was folks like her and Colonel Jay Guinea, unless he's promoted now, that started having those conversations with me during COVID and saying, hey, Austin, I never really asked you about this, but, how do you deal with race? And starting to have that discussion and starting to feel a bit more open about sharing that dialogue, right, of life at RMC and life in the battalion, of being the only person of color at every unit I went to on the officer side, for sure. So then, in a conversation with Eleanor, as she's good at, gave me the moral courage to, she said, hey, you should write a letter to General Ayer, talking about this, saying that you need his support to help the CAF with culture and diversity and share your story and see if you can participate in a useful way. And I'm like, Eleanor, why is he going to want to listen to me? Like, I don't even know if he even remembers me. I know he does, but it's like, he's a busy guy. He's not going to reply. She's like, you should send it. Of course, he knows who you are. Everybody knows who you are. I think we're always a little bit self-deprecating of ourselves. So I bang out, in the moment, bang out this letter to General Hillier, talking about, my time in service. And I guess I sent you a copy of it, I think.
Yep, you did.
But to streamline it, what I would say is, Austin Douglas now, all the things that you think would make him successful, I stop, I turn back, and I'm waiting to see this influx of black officers in the CAF and that are general officers. And same thing in industry where I've been now for 13 years. And I turn around, I'm like, where is everybody, right? I've been on these media platforms and these marketing things. And, I think what has impacted me is like, I don't know if I did anything to help. I think I was just helping myself in the moment, right? And I wasn't very conscious of my path. And it's like, that's a bit disappointing. And it kind of made the analogy of when you're golfing and you're on the tee box, some holes look tight. It's like, how am I going to get to the green? It's like, I'm just worried about my golf shot, right? And then once you're on the green, you're like, there's more space than I thought. And I made it and had a good journey, did a bunch of good things. The CAF gave me 2 degrees, gave me great opportunity, travel the world. And I look back and I'm like, looking at the golf course, everybody in the golf course is white and nobody looks like me. And I'm just a one of one. So all to say, kind of reflected that sentiment in a letter to General Lear. And to his credit, I was in his office a week later, having a conversation, because I think the letter ended with saying, I'm looking for his endorsement to participate in, CAF working groups, advisory boards, engage in leadership school, participating in any way they find best, to share my story, to share that message for someone else to hear, and be a mentor to others so that I can, be of more value, right? And he's a busy guy. He's got 1,000 things going on, right? And culture is on the top of them. So for him to take that time, definitely appreciated. And he's helped me sort of navigate that path with other general officers in the CAF, General Carillon. I had a series of meetings with the L1 Alphas, the general officers in the CAF, just to share that story. And it is a work in progress. It is difficult. It is not easy. I don't know if what I'm doing is right or wrong. There's no template, and I think part of me doing this is about sharing that message and letting others know that I'm available to talk to and to reach out to. And after a small number of events that I did last February with Black History Month, the response has been better than I would have expected. I guess I do have a story to tell that is worth telling that I was not aware of. So trying to just continue to navigate that journey. But it's difficult, in sharing that story, and talking to the L1 Alphas. I'll maybe let you explain what that means in sort of the general cadre of the CAF.
Yeah, when Austin says L1 Alphas, what that means is, so the Army, organizations that are a certain size and sit at a certain level in the hierarchy, like the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, are considered a level 1. And then the people who are the sort of second in command of those organizations, so the deputy commander of the Army or the deputy commander of the personnel command, that is the designation for their positions as L1 Alpha. So like the second person in charge of that organization, and they do a lot of the day-to-day running of the organization. So having a conversation about somebody's lived experience, about diversity with those people is really important, because they are the people who actually end up doing a lot of the implementation or the adjustment to the implementation based on new information or a new point of view. So it's really important to get their get their ears.
Yeah, and Connor Majkowski was there, Pete Scott, Greg Smith, all Royals, and I went and
Royals, not as in actual Royals, but as in Royal Canadian Regiment members, or as
very close to royalty.
The RCR might think as actual royalty.
So like me as a easygoing guy, and even this conversation is tough for me to expose myself that way. But all that said, I'm in that room, sharing that story, sharing a prepared script, being a strong infantry officer. And it got emotional, right? It's like, I'm crying a bit and Conrad's a bit emotional. And here's 2 guys that have been in Afghanistan being the most tough guys you can think of, right? Never breaking down in front of the troops. But, Pete Scott, Greg, Conrad, as they said in the meeting, never once did I bring this up in the 20 years of service. Never once was I looking for accommodation or preferential treatment, and I don't know if that was good in the end, right? Maybe I should have asked for a bit of help or made it a bit of priority, but I wasn't armed for that discussion. I don't know if the CAF was either. I think they were doing that in the peripheries of diversity and growing the force and women in the forces, all good things, but never really conscious behavior of really driving through those metrics. So all that to say, sharing that story, sharing that message, and trying to get it out there with the decision makers and the people that need to understand that. And if I can share it at a human level, then they could, maybe say to themselves, like, this is a reality. Austin, who I know and trust, has a story to share. And if it's definitely impacting him, of course it has to be impacting others, and just trying to serve as a sounding board for everybody that I know in the CAF. And for those that I don't know, to know that there's a story that I'm willing to share in any venue, whether it's big, small, or in private. Yeah.
Now, I'll make an assumption here, or I'll maybe make a statement. You tell me if I've got this right or wrong. But it seems like you are balancing, or you're trying to balance, being a helpful critic, or being a critic of the Canadian Armed Forces, of the military, in the ways that you have experienced, but also whether it be because I know you're a patriotic Canadian, but you're also in defense industry, and you're trying to make things better, continuing to serve through your role in defense industry. So how do you balance that? And again, I'm not saying this is true. I'm saying I'll make a statement and you tell me if it's true or not. But how are you balancing being a critic and trying to help in that way, but also being an ally and someone who believes in the force? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's a fair statement. I think, for all of the struggles the CAF is having, I think it's a great organization. I think people should join, be a part of it. Lots to learn, but I think the CAF, as any organization, has room to grow. So I think there's three parts of Austin that show up. There's Austin, the individual, that has a lot of thoughts, and those probably come out very openly in my peer group of friends that I grew up with, right? And there's a term that would say people are code switching, right? The way I speak with my friends in the inner city and the slang I use can be one way. I can fit into that ideology very easily. And then there's Austin, the veteran from the CAF, that has the experience of the CAF and is one of one as a colored officer, going through school in the RCR, and experiences of things that were said in jest, or some serious, or some straight out racism, if you will. There's the Austin that navigates that part of it. And then there's the Austin in industry that looks around too and walks into a room and a conference like C4I, SAR and Beyond that we do in Ottawa every year, and walks into that room and notices that the room is all white, if you will, and how do I navigate? And Austin in industry speaks on behalf of General Dynamics Mission Systems, if you will, and that's a delicate balance, because GD can sign up for some of what I want to say about culture and diversity, but might not want to sign up for all of what I have to say about culture and diversity. So how do I navigate those paths delicately? In the world of social media, you don't have to, you can just say something. I don't want to say the word wrong, but you can share an opinion that is looking to have a conversation, but it can be misinterpreted, and you can get, there are consequences that can be pretty catastrophic, or they can be pretty benign. So I'm just trying to be very aware of how I navigate that path. But I guess to go back to the beginning, it's my goal is to hold the CAF accountable, as well as industry accountable when it comes to culture and diversity. And if you want more Austin Douglases in either of those organizations. Not that there's any handouts, because I don't want any handouts, and I think my profile and my resume and my academics would show that I haven't been given any, but I never saw a general officer of color or a colonel of color for that matter, so I never knew it was attainable. I never knew what that looked like. I always thought that was something for somebody else. So, there's got to be a conscious path to career managing in a fair, honest, and open way the careers of everybody, but paying careful attention if you want a force that is reflective as best you can of Canadian society. And there's just some hard structural problems with trying to get people of color in the CAFs. Someone from Montreal to, go live a life in Gagetown or Petawawa. It's not the first thing they would sign up for, right? Going to the RMR, on St. Catherine, or the 2-3 Field Squadron on St. Catherine Street in Westmount. Those are easier attachments. So maybe you move Reg Force units to those locations and you start that way. And same thing with industry. There in Canadian industry, can't think of any VPs or presidents or few directors that are people of color in industry in Ottawa. That's for sure. So it's like, even as I navigate through, and if I want to become a VP or president, it's like, how do I get there? Who's a mentor I can speak to? And how do I understand their path and their journey? And, Austin, just keep your head down and you'll get there. Okay. But in sharing my story of diversity, with friends that I have, they're colonels and 1-stars and 2-stars, not everybody's in full agreement, right? Not everybody's a proponent of that, which is okay. Everybody's allowed to have it their own way. All that to say, there are some structural barriers to that taking place with biases that people might have. They'd be like, Austin, look at you. You made it. You weren't given any special treatment. It's like, okay, but I'm one of one, and that can't be normal if we're trying to get diversity. And from what I understand from General Carrion when I last spoke to her, I think there was only one flag officer of color in the CAF that was recently promoted. And that's just not a good number, right? And I know the Army commander is, Aboriginal, I believe, so comes from a diversity background there. Yep. But for me, it's like when we counted them on one hand, it's like, well, the Army commander and we got this other person. It's like there's 3. I don't know what the number needs to be, but 3 is not
it's
it.
Not 3. I mean, it's a good segue to maybe a story to close things off, because you're talking about, do I make a difference, and mentorship, and the video of you at Black History Month, and that's really powerful. Maybe you can sort of give us a bit of a Reader's Digest on that what happened there, and the impact of that on you.
Yeah, so as part of my engagement with General Carrion, who was quick to use my time as best she could, it was just timely that they were looking for a 4th panelist to participate in Black History Month, which I think the CAF coined as the first national CAF, Black History Month initiative, and on a national platform, right?
That I can remember.
Yeah, where they took ownership of it and were very conscious of how they were going to roll it out. So I get asked to participate on this panel with some very smart, courageous people that have a story similar to mine in different sector, private sector, and NCM, and another lady that's the head of the CSE, Carolyn. I can't remember her last name. So all that to say, once again, tell my story there, in a very humble way, just trying to get it out in front of a very large audience. And it's a hard reflection of Austin, the OC, on top of the lav, pointing and screaming and in charge of all his capacities, to the telling the story that you do not tell often and trying to get it out. So all that to say, I tell this story, and it's Q&A from the crowd. But at one point, one of the moderators says, I'd just like to interject and tell this quick story, of how he struggled with race as he navigated his way through the CAF. And he was talking about his time at basic training, when I think we're all trying to figure out, is this the right career choice for me? And why am I here? And it's a rainy day. And I think that's, regardless of color, everybody has that story. But for me and for him as well at the time, what he reflected on was that, being a person of color and sort of like one of one again, he couldn't let himself down, couldn't let his family down. And most importantly to him, he didn't want to let the commanding officer down at the time, who was a person of color. So he said, on the mic, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank that commanding officer now, Austin Douglas. So this whole time he's telling this great story. I'm like, oh, this is a great story.
I wonder who he's talking about.
I wonder who he's talking about, right? And even the cameraman wasn't in on it, because if you watch the video, the cameraman's trying to pan across and figure out who that was. So obviously he calls my name. There's a big sigh in the crowd because it's like very emotional. And I'm emotional, trying to keep it together, once again. And he shakes my hand and continues to just close off the story by saying, people are always paying attention, and people are always noticing in you and how you move and how you talk, and being sincere can have an impact one way or another. So that story resonated with him. And, I sit back down in all my humility, just trying to soak it in and keep it together, because all eyes are fixed on me in this auditorium now, right? Waiting for the tear to drop, and I survive it barely and move on. But it's stories like that allowed me to appreciate that there is a story worth telling. It's hard to tell. It could be emotional. I held it together in this chat, but like if we start talking about the troops that passed away or small moments, like it can go in a different direction pretty easily. Right. And when we start talking about race and trying to sort of survive in the daily moments, it can go different very easily. But trying to stay strong, trying to stay courageous, acknowledging every day that I am having an impact on others, and trying to do that in forums like these, like I said, one-on-one, bigger forums. And I think at the end I have to leverage the ability and access that others have, whether it's groups like TPL or general officers or general carry-on in their office, and keep them engaged to continue that conversation.
Hey, Austin, this has been great, and I always end off every podcast with a question on educate, entertain, or elevate. So, which one are you going to choose today?
I think I'm going to go with educate for 500.
All right. What do you got for educate for the listeners?
Yeah, for me in this journey, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you, it's, I think as we talked about, it's how does Austin show up, and what's the message he wants to share with you about his journey of service and what he's doing post-service. And it's a bit of a balancing act of what that message is and how much should you push out there. And it's an education for myself. And I reflect back to going to an event in Toronto with Aaron O'Toole as one of his guests at the Black North Gala. I think that was in early January or February. But all that to say, there was this student, Hannah Florist, and there's a link that I'll give you that you can probably grab on YouTube of a poem that she gave. It's a bit edited that she gave in Toronto, but it everything that she said resonated with me. And I think for young Black Canadians especially, but for anybody for that matter, to go have a look at this poem, because I think when I heard it, it surmised exactly how I felt in the moment, and reflected back on my journey as an individual, sort of growing up in Montreal to this day, and how I struggle with it. I'll take the opportunity to read a couple of lines just to make everybody understand what I'm saying. So the first couple of lines of the poem go, "To the only Black person in the room, you were simultaneously the most invisible and visibly distracting presence known to man. Learning the art of being Black in a space is a process to carry out over a lifetime. You are the greatest balancing act to grace the tightrope, staying true to your identity while prioritizing the comfort of everybody else. Making yourself small to make others feel comfortable has become your second nature and first instinct." So I think when I look at those words, all of them are true, and nothing's wrong with them. But I think for me, it's, we have to be ourselves. We have to tell our story, have others embrace it and have that discussion. There's no right or wrong to it, but I think it's worthwhile sharing and having that discussion. That's where we really get to a true place of understanding others and understanding how we all show up. So if people can go take a look at that link, understand that message, and share it and have a discussion with someone of color or not, male, female, I think it's worthwhile.
Perfect. Thanks for being on the Northern Sentinels podcast, Austin. Appreciate it.
Great to be here. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me.
You can find links to Austin's keynote for Black History Month, information on Eleanor Taylor, and his Educate recommendation on the spoken word poem of Hannah Flores in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to the NSP, and goodbye until next time.